Hello, my name is Elizabeth Guidry. Welcome to the Think JSOU series presented by the Office of Strategic Engagement at the Joint Special Operations University. We're happy to welcome our distinguished speaker today. This video is unclassed and will be recorded and posted to the JSOU network. Please keep in mind that the views and opinions of the speakers are their own and may not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, and policies of the United States government, the United States Department of Defense, the United States Special Operations Command, or the Joint Special Operations University. If you have any questions after the video, please contact us at thinkjsou@jsou.edu.
Greetings, everyone. The title of this Think JSOU webinar is Operation Jade Spear, a model of agile JIIM-C application to expose malign commercial state-owned enterprise activity. A quick note on the acronym, JIIM-C stands for Joint, Interagency, Intergovernmental, Multinational, plus Commercial Networks. Let me provide you a quick summary of Operation Jade Spear before we begin. Since 2020, Operation Jade Spear has combined the expertise and know-how of governments, universities, and the private sector to expose and counter the illegal, unreported, and unregulated activities, fishing, logging, labor, trafficking, undertaken by maligned state-owned enterprises. It was started by nearly 30 action officers across 15 U.S. departments who volunteered their time. It now has twice the number of participating departments or agencies and more than triple the number of action officers taking part. It is now cooperating with 7 U.S. allies. It has been involved in visa and fishing license revocations, enhanced regulatory inspections of fishing vessels, and counter-brand campaigns against culpable state-owned enterprises. One of many outcomes includes the delisting of a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ. Jade Spear has become one of the largest whole-of-government operations to counter illegal, unreported, and unregulated resource extraction. Its efforts have ensured a more transparent and accountable marketplace whereby sustainable competition in the interests of the American people and all of the partner state populations who depend on economic resilience tied to its natural resources. In an era when adversaries are deliberately engaging the U.S. and our network of allies and partners observing rules-based order under the level of armed conflict, Jade Spear has proven to be a measure for how we can maintain global markets where those who follow the rules will gain and sustain. First, let me give you a short biography of Mr. Dave Katz. He's a West Point graduate, served in the U.S. Army as an infantry officer and Green Beret team leader. After active service, he obtained an MS at Carnegie Tech and subsequently worked as an institutional investor in venture capital and private equity for Mellon Bank's private asset management division. He was the assistant director of the State Employees Retirement System of Pennsylvania for venture capital and alternative investments. As director of private equity at Schott Capital Management, a San Francisco bouquet investment firm, he advised and managed more than $850 million of private equity investments. He then founded his own registered advisory firm, Katz, that provided advanced analytics on more than $3 billion of clients' private equity investments. Recruited to become the VP of Development at Round One, a private equity fintech company, he developed analytical products and services for investors, entrepreneurs, and lawyers. After 2009, Mr. Katz returned to DoD. He's a thought leader on power projection who has lectured and been published extensively. I personally recommend you read his landmark journal article titled Financial Warfare, Why and How, from the publication Parameters, issued in summer 2017. David, welcome to the Joint Special Operations University today.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me.
As a brief introduction, before we get started, I'm going to approach this interview with Mr. Katz as follows. First, we'll talk about Jade Spear in terms of its design, implementation, and impact. Second, we'll talk about Jade Spear as a model of JIIM-C, That is joint, interagency, intergovernmental, multinational, plus commercial network capacity. Dave, can you summarize how Jade Spear came to being in terms of its purpose, its operation, and its budget?
Well, Pete, like all great American inventions, Jade Spear started in a bar and became the story of how a Customs and Border law enforcement operation became the largest whole of government strategic competition operation since the Cold War. Now, the purpose of Jade Spear formally was a US and allied law enforcement operation targeting a malign PRC state-owned or state-directed entity, in this case, PME. It was conducting and had conducted illicit, unregulated, unreported fishing for years, and in fact had been caught harvesting illegally inside the Galapagos Marine Reserve. But Jade Spear was provided top cover by Customs and Border, but it was a grassroots greenfield initiative. Every action officer was recruited by another action officer personally. There was no dedicated funding. There was no top-down structure other than Customs and Border Protection providing a law enforcement corps. In total, our budget was $35,000 of repurposed COVID-era travel monies, which we used to hire a think tank that had done prior research on this topic area, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing. We funded them to do research and to publish a report on our target company, translate it in Spanish and Mandarin, and distribute it to over 10,000 entities using a rented listserv.
Wow, that's fantastic, Dave. Thank you for that. Thank you for that primer. I mean, for a core set of government personnel, your operations were anything but governmental. It had a clear purpose, but its shifting approaches, its lack of dedicated line staff to do the work, and no program budget or fixed targets was able to survive without checking the quick wins box. How did it sustain?
Well, I think you initially have to approach it as to how are you going to recruit action officers who have day jobs to volunteer their time and efforts. And this is a question for anyone trying to set up a Jade Spear-like operation. So when we started, we picked a long-standing wicked problem that was shared across multiple government agencies, offices, and departments, and also with our allies and partners, because we wanted to harness a broad range of institutional authorities, capabilities, and self-interests, as well as the action officers' professional and personal self-interests. Because it was voluntary, there was little institutional downside. And because there was little institutional downside for the action officers' institutions, there was little professional risk for them. So for anyone else trying to set this up, you've got to start looking at it like that. Now, the question is, why did action officers join? It was all voluntary. Well, they joined either because they had an itch they couldn't scratch relating to the topic area, IUUF, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, or China or forced labor. Or on the other side, they saw the positive vision that Jade Spear offered in terms of food security, environmental protection, and indigenous economic development. But ultimately, Jade Spear had to be a sub-sovereign operation because that allowed us the strategic latitude without worrying about sovereign intervention or escalation. As for the shifting approaches, is this the nature of the design of the operation? Our lines of effort, our LOEs, were in fact developed by the action officers. They knew their authorities and capabilities better than anybody else. And I got to tell you, it was invigorating at times to see an action officer forward a question or propose a course of action, and then have the 72 other action officers from the 28 other departments, offices, and agencies jump on that as though they had just found the missing piece to a puzzle they'd been trying to complete in their lane for decades. Now, in terms of standing up these type of operations, we orchestrated a quick win. We had to do that. You have to do that to validate your volunteers' time and expertise. So we envisioned Jade Spear in a bar in March of 2020. We stood it up in August of 2020. And by December 7th of 2020, we had our first wins in line of effort 1 visa revocations, where Customs and Border operating through US State and Hong Kong revoked the visas of 15 of PME senior management. Ultimately, we had their entire senior management's US visas revoked. In terms of sustainment, I think a couple key approaches helped us sustain Jade Spear's voluntary effort. One, every person, every institution was equal. Everyone had value, everyone had expertise to contribute. Two, it was a community of action. If you didn't contribute action, you were out. And we did exercise that on several occasions. And third, the length of any meeting is inversely proportional to its worth. So at its peak, we would have DTCs with 29 different departments, offices, and agencies, 73 action officers, all reporting their line items. We would have discussion and determine 2-week courses of action, all within 60 minutes. 60 minutes was a forcing function for us for pre-planning and time discipline, and it was a guarantee to volunteers that we would not waste their time. Additionally, it got them used to operating on a pared down, intense operational basis. So all in all, those were our quick wins and sustainments.
That's a remarkable story, from the strategy all the way down to day-to-day operation. Dave, what were a few of its key successes, its most noteworthy do-overs, and what's next?
All right, so line of effort 1, visa revocations. As I stated, we ultimately had the entire senior management team for PME's US visas revoked. We had a line of effort 4 called Counter Brand. The think tank report is actually called Net Worth, and its translation and distribution in March of 2022 and prior in-process tweets that they did while researching actually elicited a response from China's Ministry of Agriculture. So we knew that it had registered and had heard. We consider that a partial win. Line of effort 7, counter credit, counter loan. US Treasury's Global Magnitsky Act sanctioned on PME for human rights abuse on December 9th, 2022, although it was an intermediate action for us because we were looking to technically bankrupt that company. It was a win, and it set the stage for line of effort 6 win in market denial. And that happened when the Securities and Exchange Commission of the US delisted PME from NASDAQ in February of 2023. So those were our major and partial wins. We had 2 killer do-overs. The first one was on our line of effort on enhancing regulatory inspections by allies and partners. We tried 3 times to go to Central and South America with a composite group of action officers. And then each time we were defeated by COVID. We eventually had VTCs, but it's just not the same when you're talking about this in person. And the biggest do-over for me as a finance guy was in our line of effort counterparty campaign, where we try to monetize derogatory information and push it into transactions between PME and its customers and suppliers. It turns out that PME was intimately related to a major PRC state-owned enterprise that was having a $3 billion IPO on the Hong Kong exchange. And if we could have linked Jade Spear's illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing to that IPO, we'd have taken out 10% of the froth, maybe $300 million worth of financial damage. But we did not have timely financial intelligence, and we did not have an in-place public relations element to exploit the derogatory information. So I wound up tweeting it from my basement. That was a major do-over.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple of things jumped to my mind. I mean, just the exposure of what you all were able to accomplish with that Magnitsky Act sanction in December of last year. I mean, that alone was such a big deal for something, you know, when you're talking about illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, what goes on the high seas, it is out of sight, out of mind. And it's hard to sometimes get the registered for that. So And congratulations on that front alone, but for all the other things you mentioned as well. And then I think working in COVID, the fact that this all took place during that period of time, I mean, you mentioned the South America struggles of not being in person, but you were still able to manage the Jade Spear operation in a largely virtual manner, with all of those action officers scattered throughout the continental United States. I mean, that alone was triumphant. So what you were able to do in this new normal, now that things are getting back to normal, that I think demonstrates the ability for people to work sort of above and beyond, and for these innovations on the margins to take effect. So congratulations. Let's move on to the second suite of questions. When one looks at our national security and defense strategies, or joint strategic plan on the civilian side, we can see the repeated prioritization of competing with adversaries, particularly with the People's Republic of China. Doing so is challenging, though, for two reasons. It's below the level of armed force, which at first glance takes a good portion of conventional military advantage out of the equation. And two, for the civilian side, competition does not easily overlap with our existing modus operandi to address sectoral or regional challenges as it has been done for decades. The US government builds multi-year plans, designs, and implements relatively fixed programs with the full slate of human and financial resources dedicated to every level of effort, with little space for activities like Jade Spear to propagate. So what is a more balanced solution to be able to better address both competition and our longer-term 3D objectives?
Well, I think, Pete, part of the problem is that the US government organized and structured along the lines of a 19th century industrial organization, and yet we're operating in the 21st century. I think another problem is clarity. Our definitions are muddled and our models are outdated. Current models, like the competition continuum, suffer from propositional fallacies. They directly describe the continuum between war and peace where there isn't one, or indirectly describe a continuum such as the competition below armed force. These are wrong. For example, if any force, armed or unarmed, is used, then that engagement is not competition. It's either aggression, which is defined as a forceful action, an unprovoked violation, or a hostile or injurious act, or it's conflict, which is opposition backed by power. So if we step back and look at the world, when people's enterprises or sovereigns engage one another, they do so for a purpose with an intent. And from those flow the characteristics that delineate and define that engagement. Our world effectively is divided into three discontinuous ranges across the spectrum of engagement. We have cooperation, where parties work together for perceived mutual benefit. We have competition, where one entity delivers a value proposition to a third party in exchange for a third party granted value or goods, such as being a customer or having political allegiance. And then we have a range of aggression and conflict, where, and it's the only range where adversaries target each other to collapse systems in pursuit of coercion, attrition, exhaustion, or destruction. And we spend a lot of time looking at the range of aggression and conflict, but if you look at it, the vast majority of aggression and conflict is unorganized and nonviolent. A small portion of aggression and conflict is armed. A smaller portion of the armed portion of aggression and conflict is organized, and the largest segment of that is conducted by criminals, to be followed by a smaller portion conducted by law enforcement, a smaller portion conducted by paramilitaries, and a tiny portion conducted by militaries. So we have an enormous range just in aggression and conflict where we don't have to resort to armed, organized violence. If you look at it, the largest, most enabled range of engagement is cooperation. This is where most of the world spends most of its time. This is the reason why when you pick up a cell phone, you can call somebody in Beijing and they'll answer, because at a at the most fundamental level, along the trace, the geographic trace of that call, every system is at a deep level coordinating, cooperating with each other. And this is where Jade Spear operated. We operated solely in the cooperative range of engagement.
Yeah, it's fantastic, Dave. You know, when we think of international dynamics, particularly when we're looking at CNN or reading the paper, I mean, it's often dominated by diplomatic relations, but in reality, the commercial transactions that take place are 1,000-fold versus what may transpire between governments officially. And so what has been so marvelous with the Jade Spear enterprise is that ability to work within these financial domains and take advantage of these network connections that have been able to make this initiative work almost in the private sector domain, capacity, I should say.
Well, you know, as you said, for every communication between sovereign nations, there may be 1,000 communications between enterprises in those sovereign nations, but there may be 1 million communications between peoples in those two sovereign nations.
True.
So if you're going to affect something, you want to operate in the area where you have the most latitude and the most action to do so. So cooperation starting at the individual grassroots level actually offers us the greatest means to change the dynamics all along the other ranges of engagement and the other levels of engagement, sovereign enterprises.
Absolutely. And I think our field-based presence overseas enables us to do that.
The United States, whole of government, whole of nation, and the Western international order has been in these countries for hundreds of years. This gives us an enormous competitive advantage in understanding what's going on and being able to affect it in a cooperative way or in a competitive way without even engaging in aggression or conflict. And we're not taking advantage of that, and we're not taking advantage of it from the DoD side in an integrated fashion at all.
Absolutely. Quite impressive. The answer I get when discussing novel JIIM-C collaboration to improve competitiveness relate to the key barriers I heard from the military side of the equation that prevents greater focus on Jade Spear-like operations, authorities, and permissions, those being. So how did Jade Spear traverse these barriers?
Pete, our accumulation of authorities and capabilities was grassroots and greenfield. We acquired authorities and capabilities by acquiring action officers. In many cases, I had no idea what their authorities and capabilities were. They knew better than anybody else. So, but even within agencies, we found that it took a specific action officer with specific expertise and experience to exercise a specific authority that other action officers from the same agency wouldn't know about. So perhaps most importantly, it wasn't just the individual authorities and permissions, but when you combined all those authorities and permissions by all those 73 action officers onto a target, you didn't get arithmetic expansion, you got geometric expansion of your capabilities.
Beyond the next Jade Spear, what other illegal, unreported, and unregulated resource extraction activity are targets for Jade Spear-like operations, and where are some particular areas of emphasis?
Thanks, Pete. I think there are two broad categories of Jade Spear-like operations. The first category is to directly confront global predation, like human trafficking or child labor and enslavement, IUU mining, timber deforestation. And there are still enormous opportunities, particularly around the Pacific Island countries, for IUU fishing countering, and along Central and South America. But there's another category that's perhaps more expansive but more nuanced. I think that there should be Jade Spear operations or Jade Spear-like operations stood up to protect and preserve the global systems of commerce and finance, the global maritime commons, basically the Western order of individual liberties, economic freedoms, and rule by law, not of law, that sometimes get called the international rules-based order. I think these are systems that need active protection, and a Jade Spear-like operation shared amongst the United States, allies and partners, whole of nation, and a whole of international systems can protect and sustain these systems, which are under assault by a number of participants out in global order.
Mm. Yeah, some very fundamental points there. I know that there was just recently in press wars some comments about the rules-based order and who's derived them. But the reality is that those rules are open to be changed, and they get changed regularly. It's whether or not you're abiding by them or not. And so I go back to my point earlier today about just the mere exhibit and being able to make what happened with PME widely known exposes the fact that who derived the rules and whatnot in that process. We all know that's an ongoing affair, but by breaking them and exposing that, that's a different story. And so, I mean, congratulations to you and for everyone that worked on Jade Spear for what I feel like, and what I think others that have been following this as well would be able to say, of really setting a new paradigm for how we go about this, and being able to be agile, being able to be responsive, being able to be fast, and being able to be flexible. Like you said, there were some bumps along the way that you didn't achieve everything you'd hoped to, but you did achieve a lot. So I'm thankful for your time today, and thankful we were able to get this webinar out to you all.
Thanks, Pete. I appreciated the discussion.